So if we're clear on our values, we're clear on what is important to us, both as a mother, as a human being, what we want out of life. When we're clear on what our values are, what we expect, what we want, then we can kind of weigh different decisions against those values. Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast, where we discuss all things identity, self-compassion, and fulfillment within and beyond motherhood. I'm Emily Rose Hardy, a mindset and self-love coach for moms. I am a firm believer that to be able to take care of our children, we must take care of ourselves first. This is not a parenting podcast. No, this is a podcast where we will challenge the societal expectations of what it means to be a mom, demystify the perfect mom myth, and learn to love ourselves. You are worthy, mama. Let's do this. Clarity around your own values is one of the greatest determinants for the level of ease and satisfaction in your life and motherhood experience. When you have clarity about your own values, life and motherhood are just easier. Now, I know that sounds like a big claim, but I'm going to explain. I mean, even just that word values can bring on all the eye rolls, right? I know it. Like, oh, get clear on your values. Okay, what does that even mean? So we are going to get into that. I'm also going to be sharing a resource that I've recently created for you to help you actually take action on getting clear on your values, because like I've said, doing so can be life-changing in the best way. So I'll give you more details on that in just a moment, but it is a free resource, so definitely stay tuned for that. Now, to what it means to actually get clear on your values. For most of us, we generally know what we like and what we don't like. Things we see or come across that just give us these good, positive feelings inside, or things that make us shudder or feel that or you just don't feel right in one way or another. That's pretty clear, right? A really obvious example of this could be, if you see someone speaking rudely to a server at a restaurant while you're out at lunch and it rubs you the wrong way. Okay, yeah, treating people poorly just so you can feel right is not one of your own personal values. And actually, in that case, your value is likely that you value mutual respect and treating all people with kindness, especially those who are bringing you delicious food, right? And so you can kind of see your values peeking up there. Another example on kind of the other end of things, a lot of us like watching those feel-good videos, when we're scrolling TikTok or whatever, the ones where someone is caught doing a good deed or whatever it might be, and it just feels like good to watch. It's tapping into our values, and that's why we are connecting with what we're seeing. That's why you are keeping up with watching these videos, because they are striking a chord with your own values. But typically, actually identifying what our own values are as individuals can be extremely challenging in some ways. And there's quite a few reasons for that. But in my opinion, the two most important reasons for that being a challenge are, number one, we've never really stopped to think about it. And this world and the way of doing life doesn't tend to give us really the space or even just a reason to do so. Why would we stop and check in with our values? And two, the second reason this can be a challenge, there are a lot of societal and cultural values at play that influence our own, right? Those external values influence our own internal values. And it can be really hard to distinguish between what actually belongs to us versus what we just perceive as our own values, right? So to examine each of those challenges a bit, when I say that we've never really stopped to think about it, what I mean is that in the hustle and bustle of life, we don't necessarily naturally stop and think, is what I'm doing actually aligned with my values? What are my values? What do I want? What do I feel is right in this world, right? Like, unless you're really coming up against something you morally don't agree with, that's really stretching your values, really pushing up against them, then in that case, you might be kind of forced to reckon with what you value. But otherwise, we're kind of conditioned to just not really question things and to not give ourselves the space to check in. And what it comes down to is that many of us don't really deeply know ourselves that well when it comes to what we value. Now, there's reasons for this, right? A lot of times we do kind of act in autopilot, and that's important. We can't constantly be checking in and thinking like, what's right, what's wrong, right? Like that's not always going to work. We would be completely stuck in life if we were considering exactly what we value in every moment of every day. But we don't want to go to the extreme of just kind of living in autopilot and not ever checking in. And that's what tends to happen when we're not given the intentional space and reason to check in with our values. So then that second part about there being a lot of external values at play. I want to kind of talk about just a few ways we see this showing up just to kind of make it clear what I'm talking about. It's something, though, that we do address here on the Worthy Mother podcast quite often when we talk about the idealized version of motherhood, right? So some examples of these external values come from, if we think about if we're an individualistic or collectivist society. So some societies are really all about being like individuals that we all make our way in the world on our own. And so as a society, as a culture, we really value that. Whereas others are going to be more about supporting each other in this collectivist way. I'm not going to get too much into the details of that, but you can see how like in the United States, we are a more individualistic culture. And so if you're raised in the United States, you're naturally going to see that as a value, whether it's something that you actually believe on your own to yourself, that like it's important to be successful as an individual. That's a message that you're going to be exposed to in the United States. In other cultures, that need for individual success is a lot different, right? In collectivist cultures, it's more about the well-being of the group. And that's just a different way of looking at life. But if you're raised somewhere where that is the norm, that is the value that's being held as important, you're a lot more likely to just have that naturally as your value because it's the messages that you're taking in, right? Another kind of way we see this happening is with hustle culture and the culture of money equaling success, right? And so again, speaking to the experience in the United States, we have a lot of messages coming in about working hard and how you need to be making money to be successful and things like that. And those values of hard work and of earning money and supporting yourself, those are cultural values. Those are external values. We can also hold them as internal values. Absolutely. But it's very much true that those values exist in our culture, our external culture. And so we can embody those without even thinking about it, without even knowing, like, do I think that I have to work so hard that I'm exhausted and drained just to be worthy of success and of, to be a worthy human being? Maybe I don't actually believe that, but I'm taking it in because that's kind of the message that I'm getting from the external world. And really, it's acting as my own individual value, even if it's not something I value. Another way we see this is with religion. Whether you are raised religious, whether you're raised in a particular religion or not, religion is something that often does impact values. So I personally am not someone who was raised as religious, but I have seen this in my own life, just being raised in a society where certain religious values come to the surface in the culture, right? A lot of times with religion too, we are taught that certain values are right. And there can be very little space to consider whether that is something that we actually believe as individuals. Again, it's not to say that those religious values are not also your individual values. It's just to say that we don't necessarily stop and think about the distinction between the two or know what the distinction between the two is. So in many cases, our own individual values are actually influenced by external factors. And that's not inherently a bad thing, right? But it means that it can end up being nearly impossible to distinguish between our own values and the values of the world around us without being really intentional about it. We are taking in messages and norms constantly about what is right, what is wrong, how we actually want to exist in the world, what it means to be enough, what it means to be worthy. And so it can be hard to determine what we actually believe in any given situation because we might just default to something that is external to us and not actually check in with, what do I believe here? What do I believe here given my own context and my own individual beliefs? So as I said before, I have provided a free resource in the show notes to help you actually take the time to stop and reflect on your own values. You can download the Aligned Motherhood Workbook and start to pull apart what actually is important to you in motherhood and life And doing that is going to help you in each of the areas that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why getting clear on your values is so beneficial. And so when you do the activities in the workbook, you're going to be able to use the result of that to help in each of these areas to really see the benefit of getting clear on your values in each of these areas. So definitely head to the show notes and download that workbook. It's completely free. Go grab it. It's going to really help you see what you actually want out of your motherhood experience. And doing that can really impact the way that you feel about yourself in motherhood and how you show up and really how you feel surrounding things like mom guilt and the expectations on you and what's actually important to you as a mother and just as a human being. So let's get into the meat of the conversation. Why getting clear on your values makes such a positive difference. I'm going to kind of focus on 3 areas of why this makes a difference. As with a lot of things, there's overlap in these 3 areas. They're not mutually exclusive and distinct, but I'm going to kind of separate it just for the ease of the conversation into these 3 sections. So we're going to talk about decision making. We're going to talk about expectations and the perfect mother myth. And we're going to talk about priorities, both long-term and short-term. Okay. Those are the areas where being clear on what we value is going to help us in motherhood and life. So to start, decision making. According to research, and this is really generally accepted information, on average, we each make approximately 35,000 decisions per day. Let that sink in for a moment. 35,000 decisions. As parents, many of those decisions impact our children. So first of all, I'll say here, you can see why it's important to be somewhat on autopilot for a lot of this, right? We can't constantly be really, really aware and thinking about each decision with considering all points for 35,000 decisions a day. Like it wouldn't work. That's not survivable. But what ends up happening when we're making these decisions on autopilot, if we're not clear on what we value and what's important to us, if that's not really internalized, then we're going to be making the best decisions we can on autopilot. But that autopilot might not be, really oriented towards what actually matters to us. And then when there is a decision that we actually need to sit and contemplate, right? Because it's a big decision or it's something that is, coming straight to us or we actually have to think about it. If we're not clear on what we value, it can end up being a lot of work to kind of sift through the options in a decision and really get clear on like, what is it that I want to do here? What's going to be the best choice? Because really, in most situations where we have to make a decision, and I'll say really in all situations where we have to make a decision where we're like feeling stuck, because if it was an obvious decision, then okay, that's not hard. But in those decisions where we feel stuck, there's probably not a super clear right answer, right? That quote, right answer. There may be a best answer for us, a best decision for us, but we might have to consider like different angles of that to really know what that is in our specific situation for us. And a lot of that comes down to like, well, what's actually important to me in this situation? Not what's important to my mom, not what's important to my best friend, not what's important to, the neighbors down the street or to some news article that I read yesterday that talked about XYZ. No, what's important to me? I'm making the decision for me and my family. So you can think about this. If we're clear on our values, we're clear on what is important to us, both as a mother, as a human being, what we want out of life. When we're clear on what our values are, what we expect, what we want, then we can kind of weigh different decisions against those values. We have a kind of given criteria to say, I'm going to actually weigh this against what I want and see if I can come up with the best decision based on my own values. If you're not clear on what your values are, then you can't do that, or you have to really start from, square one every time one of these decisions comes up. And that's exhausting. That's a lot of work. So if you can kind of do the front loading of that work and get clear on your values for the most part, right? Then when you come to a decision, you can kind of weigh it against the values that you're aware of and say, is there a best choice based on what's important to me? And that's really a big thing that the workbook that I'm providing for you in the show notes does, is it gives you the space to reflect on those values and what's important to you in motherhood before you get these decisions in front of you. So that when you do have a decision to make, you can say, you know what, I'm going to go back and read what I said was important and be able to say, you know what, it's really important to me that I put my kids' emotional needs first. And so I'm going to really make sure that in this decision, I'm doing what I can to support my kids' emotional needs over the finances or whatever it is, right? There's a lot of times complicated decisions where there's no perfect answer. And so knowing what is the most important to you is going to be super helpful when it comes to making those decisions with a lot more ease and a lot more satisfaction in the results, because you know that you made a decision that was aligned with what you actually wanted, right? So that's enough on decision making. You can kind of see how that could be extremely helpful in any given decision making experience when you have your values laid out. Another thing, and this is super important in the context of motherhood, for how being clear on your values can support you in motherhood and life, is with your expectations, specifically surrounding the perfect mother myth and what it means to be this idealized version of a mother. So we talk about this a lot on the Worthy Mother podcast, right? We've talked a lot about this vision of society in general of what it means to be the perfect mom, what the ideal mom does. And a lot of times there's a lot of contradictions in this. It's not actually a real person. It's not something that's actually attainable. And it may not actually be super clear what that ideal is, but it exists. It's out there in the world, right? And a lot of times we are kind of holding ourselves to this idealized version of motherhood. That is actually an expectation and a value, in a sense, that does not belong to us. It belongs to the external world. So, to give an example of this, I personally value autonomy in my own life and experience and my motherhood experience. That's something that I have found is extremely important to me. I need time to myself. And I've really found over the last few years that I really value being able to have my own space to dream and approach goals and do things outside of my role as a mother, outside of my children, outside of my family, right? That's really important to me. I really value that. Society gives us this message that the ideal mother, the perfect mother, maybe does all of those things, right? She may have her own goals and her own things, but she also gives 100% of her attention and care and love to her children. And that's my perception of this message that I'm getting from society, is that to be a good mother, to be this ideal mother, I need to be giving my children all of my attention when I'm with them. If I wasn't checking in with my own values, if I was just kind of going along with society's expectation, then I would say, you know what? My children are here. It's really important that I give them 100% of my attention. And, I really shouldn't be sending them to daycare because I work from home and I really should be giving them 100% of my attention. I'm the one who should be caring for them 100% of the time. And that really means I probably shouldn't be doing my work. I should really be caring for them. And so when I am doing my work, I'm going to feel extremely guilty because I should be caring for them. Or I'm sending them to daycare. I should feel guilty because that's not what the good mom does. That's not what our society values. I'm not doing this right. Right? We get caught in those traps. That's a really kind of extreme example, but it also is something that happens for a lot of moms. Extreme, but very common. And so you can see there how just going off of the societal values, going off of those external expectations of what it means to be a mom, if I'm not checking in with my own values, I'm going to feel extremely guilty when I'm not living up to those values and expectations because I haven't considered the fact that it may not be actually true for me. And then two, if I do go towards living up to those expectations and those standards, right? I am giving my kids all of my attention, then I'm going to feel extremely dissatisfied. I'm going to feel unfulfilled and not really know why. Why am I feeling so in my motherhood experience when I'm doing it right? I'm doing it the way that we're supposed to do it. And it's because I haven't checked in with my own values of what's important to me. And so I'm not doing it aligned with what's important to me. I'm doing it with what I think is important to the society. That's not benefiting me. That's not benefiting my kids. And so when we aren't clear on our own values and we're looking at expectations of what it means to be a mom, we get stuck in these cycles of doing things that actually aren't what we want to be doing. It's not how we want to be showing up. And that can be damaging to us because we're not getting the fulfillment and the purpose that we desire and deserve out of life. But it can also be damaging to our children because we're not showing up as fulfilled, taken care of, whole human beings. We're showing up as some shell of a perfect mom. That's not helpful for anyone. So you can see again how being really clear on your values is going to help you actually navigate, okay, what do I do that's important to me? How is showing up as a mother in a way that's aligned with my values going to be helpful? And again, this is something that the Aligned Motherhood Workbook is really going to help you look at. Going to help you look at what are the values of society, what are the expectations of society, and what are the expectations you actually have? Because you do have values, you do have things that are important to you. Knowing what those things are, and then being able to use those as the measuring point of like, am I doing this in the way that I want? That's going to be a lot more beneficial to everybody than the other way of doing it compared to society's expectations, right? So the last piece I want to talk about here of why getting clear on your expectations is so critical, so important, so beneficial is it helps us to prioritize. And this is both in the long term and the short term. So this is really in line with that conversation about decision making. When we are able to prioritize things, we are able to kind of eliminate the in the moment decision making in a sense, right? So thinking about priorities, if we think about long term priorities, maybe you really value being an active contributor in your career. You're doing work that feels really fulfilling and you want to be, gaining more and more credibility in your field and moving up the ladder in whatever line of work that you do. And so that's really important to you. If you are clear that that is a value for you, that is important, it's going to make your life what it's meant to be because it's something that's so aligned with what you want, then you can know to prioritize your work. That's going to be different for someone who maybe their priority, their most important thing is being able to stay home with their children, right? And there's no good or bad inherently about either of these options, right? There are plenty of moms who are like, no way do I want to be home with my kids all the time. And so prioritizing career is going to be a lot more important than a mom who's like, no, I really want to be home with my kids and be dedicating my being to raising them and to taking care of the home, then that's what they value and that's what they can prioritize, right? In the long term and the short term. Again, it's important that we're not placing these societal expectations, these societal values in these spaces because that's not helpful for anyone. There's no one right way to be a mother. There's no one right way to show up in life. There's no one way to live the most fulfilling, purposeful life for you as an individual. It really comes down to what is important to you, what matters to you, what's the best for you and your family. And so we can't prioritize based on, well, I'm a mom now, so I have to give up everything that I've done prior to this just to raise my kids. Well, if that's not what is the value to you, right? That's not what you value is completely giving everything up to be there and raise your kids, then that's not actually the best choice. But if you're not clear on what that value is, you may be led to believe that that is the best choice and that is where your priorities should exist. And you're not going to be able to actually prioritize in a way that benefits you and your family. So that is kind of something where we can think about the more long-term or like big scale priorities of what we have. And I want to point out there too, it's not like, oh, I'm prioritizing my career. That doesn't mean you have to be prioritizing your career above being a present mom for your kids, but it may be prioritizing your career above being home all the time with your kids. So I just want to be careful when we're talking about priorities because, it's the kind of conversation of like, you can only have one priority, but that's not really fair when it comes to talking about the complexity and fullness of our lives. And there's so many different things constantly fighting for attention. So just being clear on what we value and when we value different things is important, right? So on more of a short term, kind of smaller scope basis, some way that we can see this kind of show up. And this is something that is relevant to me right now. It's a stage of motherhood I've entered. And that is like having our kids in sports and being the one responsible for getting them where they need to go all the time. For some moms, having your kids being able to do everything that they're able to do, right? Like soccer, dance, baseball, basketball, swimming, all the different things, that might be the priority, right? They're going to, I don't even want to say sacrifice. It may just be like, no, that's what I value. I value giving my kid the opportunity to do all of those different things. That's really important to me. So I want to make it happen. Whereas for some parents, some moms, that might not actually be the thing that they value the most. And they say, you know what? I am working a ton and I really would value having time to myself. So I'm going to let my kid play one sport a year or, 2 seasons a year. Or, you know what? We actually aren't going to be doing that this year. And like knowing that again, there's no right decision in any of those, just a general right answer. It's more about what is the priority to you and to your family. And you have to be clear, again, on your values to be able to prioritize those things. That's kind of showing a kind of the extremes on both ends of that. But you can kind of see there how, like, when it comes to prioritizing, then having those priorities in place can really help then with that decision making and making it so that we're not having to consider like all the different things all the time of like what the best answer is, when it's like, I know that I prioritize my Thursday evenings that I get by myself. And so we're not going to do soccer practice on that day. That's just not going to happen. That's a boundary I'm going to hold because the priority is my self-care Thursday evening, right? Whatever it is. So again, you can see here really clearly, being clear on your values, knowing what you value, knowing what is important to you is going to really help you prioritize the long-term factors in life that are going to help you live aligned to those values, and also the short-term, in the moment things where we're making more decisions based on those priorities that are aligned with our values. Really important to be super clear on those values. So to summarize, because again, I really want this to be super clear why you need to get clear on your own values, what you value as a mother. Decision-making becomes a lot easier and a lot less time consuming and a lot more intentional when we are clear on our values. It also helps us to understand our own expectations, what's important to us in our role as a mother. So we're not comparing ourselves to some external ideal, but really compared to what we actually value and what matters to us. And it also helps us prioritize and make decisions based on our priorities that are clear. And we can kind of hold those boundaries the way that we need to make sure that we are doing what's important to us. We are living the lives that we want aligned with our own values. So again, if you are like, yes, I am convinced, I really want to get clear on what I actually individually value as a mother in order to get clear on what I expect of myself and why, what's actually important to me in the way that I show up as a mom, and separating my own values from the values of society and the expectations of society, and really being able to make those decisions that are the best possible decisions for myself and my family, rather than decisions that I feel like I have to make or I'm just making on autopilot because I'm defaulting. Then the free Aligned Motherhood Workbook is going to help you do just that. You can find the link for this resource in the show notes. It's going to be a super helpful resource when it comes to kind of showing up and making decisions in your life. You can refer back to what you've reflected on in this workbook, because getting clear on your values and really internalizing that, as you can see from this episode, can help you really in all areas of your life, but really in feeling good about motherhood. That's really the goal here, making sure that you feel like you are showing up in a way that you are happy with. You are not kind of falling into those patterns of guilt and shame when it comes to your motherhood experience. And you are actually able to live a fulfilled life, whatever that means to you, both in your role as a mother and beyond. So definitely check that out, definitely download it and give those activities a go. And that is all I have for you this week. I am so grateful that you are here sharing the space with me, giving yourself the time to check in on yourself and just taking care of yourself in this way of being here. We are going to leave it at that. You are worthy, Mama.